This man is an author. He writes stories. He has just finished writing a story. He thinks many people will like to read it. So he must have the story made into a book. Let's see how the book is made. First, the story goes to the printing shop. This workman is a typesetter. He starts the job of preparing the story so it can be printed. As the typesetter works on new lines, a man takes the finished lines over to a long table. This page is to have a picture. This key locks the lines and pictures tightly in the frame. Now the plates are cut apart. Next, the plates go over to the printing press. Now, one push of a button and the big press starts. Sheet after sheet, the printed pages begin to pile up at one end of the press. Here in the bookbinding plant, each large printed sheet will be folded until it reaches the size of a single page. This machine gathers the folders in the right order from the first page to the last page of the book. This machine sews the folders together with strong thread. This machine trims the pages to just the right size with 3 sharp knives. Strong book covers are made from paperboard. Next, cloth from this roll is glued over the paperboard. At last, the name of the book is stamped on the cover in shining gold letters. One push, and the book has a cover around it. Another push, and the cover is glued tight. Here they go, all finished and ready for shipping to all parts of the world. The story has been made into a book for readers everywhere.
Hello. I'm glad to be back here for another meeting of the Sketchbook Club. And today I have a theme in mind which is a bit broader perhaps than some of the single author topics that I've tackled before. I want to talk about books that artists and authors have made themselves. That is to say, not only did they write them or illustrate them or design them, but a lot of times they also published them. They printed them, they distributed them, they dealt with all aspects of the publishing process. And there's a lot of great books that are being made that way, and I'm fortunate to have a lot of them here on the shelves behind me. In fact, I reserve a couple of shelves here for a lot of, and a few on this level too, but mainly these 2 shelves are dedicated to books that people have made and sent me. So they're made by friends of mine, people who know I'm interested in books, and they make them and they send them to me. So I thought what might be cool today was, rather than go in detail through any one of them, let's just check out a whole bunch of different ones, and you can see all the different kinds of books that people are making and sort of understand the process that they might be going through to make them themselves. I think it's a really interesting and different kind of approach to having a sketchbook turn into something else, taking the art that you're making in your sketchbook and launching it onto an unsuspecting world and having a great impact. So these books have all meant a great deal to me over the years. It's a terrific honor to have people send them to me, of course, but also looking at the different ways that people make things and the different topics, I mean, incredible diverse topics that people feel are worthy of making a book. And they're right. A regular publisher might not be so convinced, because regular publishers have all these restrictions on them, right? They have to make books that will go into a major bookstore. And they have a shelf that they have to sit on that's in a particular category. They have to make enough money not only to pay for the actual publishing and printing of the book, but also to pay for the editorial staff, the marketing staff, and of course, in this day and age, probably shareholders, Wall Street, etc. So when they look at a book topic, they may go, why would we do a book about that weird, obscure niche thing? How many copies of that are you going to actually sell? But if you're publishing it yourself and go, you know what, I'm really passionate about this, and I bet you there's some people out there who are too. The fact is that there are something like 1 million books being published in the United States every year, and very, very few of them sell more than a couple of thousand copies. Like, we think of these massive 1 million copy bestsellers, right? We think of the Stephen Kings of the world. But the reality is that's an incredibly small sliver of the publishing world. Most books only sell a few copies. And, with ebooks, certainly you could make a book that one person buys and, it would still perhaps be a worthwhile effort. But when it comes to actually publishing a book, printing a book, having copies of it, distributing them, it's a whole other level of effort. And, you have to really believe in what you're doing. But you can find an audience out there for the things that you make. You can find other people who are interested in the topic that you covered, interested in your approach to it, or interested in your artwork, your writing, your personality, your character. There are some. It may not be, the level of, a massive New York Times bestseller, but that doesn't make it not worth doing. And we have the technology, the resources to do it now. You can go online, you can find printing houses that will print 1 copy of a book or 10 copies of a book, and, you can also find ones that will make it worthwhile to make 100 or more. So, anyway, before I get too distracted, I want to grab a bunch of these books, and then I'm going to move over here and talk to you about what I think is cool and interesting. So, give me a second to just take care of this. All right, there's lots of stuff here. I hope I haven't taken on too much, but let's spend a little bit of time looking at these quickly, individually. Let me just rearrange them a bit. All right, clear some space here, folks. So let's start with a friend of mine who I've talked about before, which is Richard Bell. So Richard Bell lives in Yorkshire, and he was a best-selling author. I mean, many in the 60s, in the early 70s, I think. He had a book called Britain, where he walked all around England and did a huge illustrated journal, and it was a bestseller. And but then ultimately he became disenchanted with publishers, and so he started publishing things like this. There's lots and lots of them, and I own many of them because I think they're really fantastic. This is his best-selling one, actually, Grandma's Guide to the Internet, as it happens. But these are all books that he published himself. You see, with little drawings. This is just explaining, how to use a computer for people who hadn't before. This book came out in the year 2000, dedicated to his mother, who at 82 began using a computer. So, little tiny pamphlet. It sold huge amounts, and he owns every aspect of them. But then he also does a lot of books like this, which are kind of guides to parts of Yorkshire. So the sort of walking guides through the streets, and he gives little walks. There's a lot of different kinds of walking books like this, Walks in Robin Hood's Yorkshire, which has little, very specific. So there's maps, and there's very specific. Walk here, turn there. You'll see this. Here's a bit of history of Robin Hood and so forth. Here, Walks in the Rhubarb Triangle. And again, stories of this area that you can walk through and have experiences. So great use of maps, all again hand drawn, and all these little details of things that he observed. And these books sell in local little kind of bookstores, gift stores, stationery stores, places where visitors might drop by and are looking for something to do as they wander around Yorkshire. This is a book about just really his sketchbook and different aspects of things that he's observed. In this case, sort of snake-like things. He calls them sushis because they were little tiny books. See, that book is quite thin. So it's almost a pamphlet, but he sells them. He has, here it is, selling for £5, and it has an ISBN and a little thing so you can scan it. So lots of these kinds of books that he's made, and and he basically has made a living for many, many years making little books like this and selling them himself out of his house and publishing them in different ways. So that's one style of book, and there's just so many of them. All right, then there are other books like this. This is a book that is, I guess you would call it a vanity project. They used to call them vanity press, meaning that it was your vanity to have a book published with your name on it, but I think that's nonsense and insulting, honestly. But so Walt Taylor is a great artist, and he you can find him at crackskullbob.squarespace.com. You can find him online in various places, but he likes to go and do life drawing, and so he decided just to print a little book of his life drawings. Some of them are really beautiful, lots of different kinds. Some of them are done digitally. Some of them are of the other people drawing, and just beautifully designed little book too, with a couple notes here and there. He's just a really accomplished artist with a great sense of humor. So there's always some fun to be had. So if you're interested in life drawing, and you should be because it's a fun thing to do, check out this little book. And as I said, it's called Naked People and the People Who Draw Them. Can't get more basic than that. Miguel Herranz. Miguel, teaches at Sketchbook School. He's taught in our urban sketching class. He lives in Barcelona. And, he just has basically taken pages from his sketchbook here and has printed them up in various formats. And it's just an opportunity, really, to own one of his sketchbooks, to be able to go back and look at it and to have, the inspiration that he gives with all his drawings. I mean, I just love the way he draws. And this book is a really great little resource to have if I'm ever needing little freak hands. That's his nickname, freak hands, in my life. So, this is a little book published by Trevor Romain. Trevor is a friend of mine who lives in Texas. He's originally South African, but he's done several books, some of which have sold quite well. I don't have one handy, but they're about memories of his childhood in South Africa. Weird kinds of, what kind of candy did they eat? What was some of the word things that they came up with? What was the music that they were listening to? All these memories, and he created these books that were like real terrific nostalgia. But and a lot of South Africans glommed onto them. And but Trevor does a lot of stuff for children, and he writes a lot of and illustrates a lot of little books that are often about challenges in life. So they're about bullying, they're about PTSD, various kinds of things, divorce, and so he writes these books, illustrates them himself. He goes around to schools and he does talks and presentations, and he also works with children in Africa who have been traumatized by war. So, but he's published a lot of these books, and he sells them on trevorromain.com. And they're, again, thin little book, but that's all that they need to be. Some of you know Michael Nobs. Again, Michael has taught at Sketchbook School, but Michael began years ago by doing a little book, a book zine, really, called The Beanie, with his simple drawings about his life. And, so books can veer into zine territory. I'm not sure what the difference is between a thin book and a zine, but it doesn't really matter. But this is, again, an opportunity for Michael to share his life, his observations, his stories, and his drawings, of course. And, to publish, he's published a series of these. Not as many as I think he planned to, because there's, I think, maybe 3, but they're a decade or so ago. But I like having those little books around. This is another sort of sketchbook zine type thing by Jason Doss, and it's called If You See Something, Say Something. And so he just collects pages from his sketchbook, different kinds of things that he's drawn, and he's published them into this little zine that I think may have been actually made on a color copier, or maybe even black and white copier, because they're all black and white. Very simple representation, inexpensive. You could get it made at Kinko's, and wife drawing. Again, there's something I love. Just love Jason Doss's drawing style. It's sort of like reminds me of like ash can style, Reginald Marsh, 1930s. I don't know. I brought that up to him, and he kind of looks at me blankly. So maybe that's just my particular connection. But again, it's just nice to have all these, to have, as I said, this shelf of them. To be able to go back and look at. Juliana Cole's, this book is a bit more ambitious in its printing technique. All beautiful 4-color. And it's a telling of a story in this sort of exotic, ancient-looking type. And it's a story, this legend, Captain's Journal, combining photographs and her amazing collage-style drawings. Again, I'm fairly sure that this is a self-published book, so one that she made and sells, and it's just so rich. I mean, Juliana's work is so intense and emotional and gorgeous. I just don't really know how she made this book. It had so much effort went into it, but not the kind of thing that you would probably find at Barnes & Noble, as are most of these things, but very personal, a great little story, But again, something that. Yeah, it's made in the USA, Charleston, South Carolina, in 2014. So, this is a book that meant a lot to her, and so she made it. This book by Johannine Madison, Losing Dave, An Artist's Journey Through Loss. And, she made this book to talk about her husband's death after 7 years of cancer, and what it was like to go through that year of loss, and drawings and words. Beautiful, sensitive book that meant a lot to me. I mean, she wrote this book not that long, it was not that different of a time from when I had my own loss, when I lost Patty. And I did a book called A Kiss Before You Go. But this book was something that meant a great deal to her, talking about her dreams and her memories. It's a very touching book. And, it's designed for sharing with people for whom it means a great deal. So here's an important moment in her life, and she's sharing it by making a book out of it and sending it to people who she thinks it will touch. So, again, you may have a story to tell that no big corporation thinks is worth investing a lot of money in, but could change somebody's life, could bring them healing, and that's a really important thing to spend your time on, I think. So, Andrea Joseph, she's taught 2 classes for us at Sketchbook School, including a beautiful course on creative lettering, and as you can see, her work is beautiful, and she considers it to be too obsessive. You can see this book is called How to Draw Like a Nut. There's, in fact, drawings of nuts. But to own Andrea Joseph images like this is really valuable. I don't know, I just love to come back and look at them. I'm really glad that she made this book. And you can spend an awful lot of time. Hey, look, there's my name. You can spend an awful lot of time studying this book and going deep into it, but also studying her ballpoint pen drawings are just madness. I don't know how she does it. I've tried and failed to accomplish what she does. But, this is a little tiny pamphlet-y kind of thing, right? You could call it a zine. I don't think it really is even. I think it's a book. But I don't know, again, what's the distinction? But she calls it a tutorial, sort of, kind of, not really. But a lovely little thing. Summer Pierre is a cartoonist, and this is a sort of series of zines, summer comics, she calls them. I think making a comic book is a great thing. I've never really made a full-blown comic book, but I think it's a wonderful way to tell stories and what I like about comics is, in a lot of cases, it doesn't put a huge amount of emphasis on every drawing, so they don't have to be like perfect illustrations. They're really just a way of bringing you to a story and making it pass. It's the combination of words and pictures. And, you can see this is, again, a diary of hers. It meant a great deal to her, and she's turned it into this book. So, lovely thing. Look at this, eraser-carved portraits by Stephen Sloan. And it's literally that. He explains how to take an eraser and carve it by taking a photograph and the steps that you need to do to actually make one. But, it's, again, taking something that you know, taking a piece of information that you have, a process that you use, and sharing it with people by making a little book. That's a really valuable thing to consider doing. There's also this little magazine, Eraser Carvers Quarterly, showing different kinds of carving of erasers, tips and stuff like that. So, again, sharing your knowledge, another reason to write a book. And Stephen Reddy has written, and I think he has a third book coming out now, but these first two, This Is Then, That Was Now, and Now Where Was I, are both self-published books. And they are, his drawing is great. And these are just the stories of his life, comics about his life. He spent some time as a teacher in China, and he talks about that too. It's really a memoir, and it's kind of a jumble of lots of different things. And Stephen did a Kickstarter campaign to raise money to make this book, to get it printed and published. So, that's another possibility, particularly when you have a book like these. These books are very ambitious in terms of their production quality. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary that he's able to do all this on his own, really, with no editors, no designers. He made these really complex, thick books. I mean, each book is like 300 pages long. And, so he had a lot to say, and he made some beautiful books to do it. So, here's a more modest effort. This is by Bryce Weimer, who is an artist in New York. He's a designer, and he made this book. Look, he sent me this print with it, too. Isn't that beautiful? It's enclosed in the book. But it's called Flat Earth, and it's basically just pages from his journals. Beautifully presented. Oops. The book is a little fragile. It's about 10 years old. It's one of the problems, I guess, you have with self-published books, is you have to watch the quality of your binding. But the reproduction on this book is beautiful, and his pages are really gorgeous. He really considers the entirety of every page, and I mean, some of these pages are like, it's hard to believe that these are just handmade. I mean, they're just so perfect. It's sort of a surreal point of view, but look at that. I don't know. I think his work is beautiful, and again, the opportunity to own it and hear talking about his tools. I know. I could spend a lot of time looking at this book, and I have, and that's why it's falling apart. But I'm not sure that there ever was a volume 2 of Flat Earth. But this one is well worth owning. This is a weird little project that I was asked to participate in. Some of you, this basically is a book with a CD in the back. And what this book is it's a collection of songs about the presidents, every single president. And they wrote a song about the president, and then they asked different artists to make an illustration about it. And then they self-published and produced the whole thing. So it's interesting. It's an interesting project. The music is great, and just the different designs that people made. I think I'm in here somewhere. I seem to have forgotten what I did in it. It was a while ago. Oh yes, I made this one of James Garfield, who was killed, assassinated like soon after becoming president. In fact, he was sewn up, and his surgeon kept putting his dirty fingers into the wound, and so I made this portrait out of fingerprints combined with stitching. Anyway, so this book is all different interpretations of the presidents in song and art. Cool little thing. So there you go. That's 2 CDs, in fact. Washington to Pierce, Buchanan to Wilson. Of Great and Mortal Men, it's called. Came with this little sleeve that goes around it. Some of you may know Carrie Smith. This was her husband who made it. Who made this book? I think Carrie's in here. Rama Hughes is. Anyway. What else? Here's a little book my grandfather made for me. He wrote me a story about King Solomon. And he had, book was made a long time ago, but he had this fancy typewriter that wrote in script. So he made me this book, and then he kind of bound it himself with a piece of string and a piece of plastic and some cardboard. Another way of making a book. What else? Keith Miller made this book of his watercolors, travel drawings, watercolors, 1970 to 2013. Beautiful drawings, aren't they? Watercolors, look at that, on an envelope. Sometimes I feel like the typography gives away self-published books. The design isn't quite right, the type isn't quite right, but that's part of the charm also, that somebody made it the way they wanted to make it, not necessarily following the conventions of publishing. So, here's a little book that Marluce made, Marluce de Vries. Marluce is a teacher who's taught at Sketchbook School and is now participating actually in a new class that I want to tell you about, that all this is leading up to in a way. We have a new class that's starting called Illustration Nation. And the idea behind Illustration Nation is we took a bunch of illustrators, Marluce being one of them, and Penelope Dullahan, you might know, she's an amazing illustrator. And so the idea was, how do illustrators do it? Like, how do you make these books? How do you make any books? How do you illustrate a book? How do you make a product? Like, how do you design a tea towel? How do you make an illustrated mug? What are the steps that you have to go through to actually make something as a professional illustrator, to give it that professional look? Right? That's what we want. We don't want just things that feel handmade. Sometimes we want to take it to the next level. We want to push it. We want to do better. Right? But we have to understand those professional techniques and approaches. How do you do that? And what's the process? And there is definitely a process. And I think process is a really important thing to consider, because when you take on a project like this, making a big book, you have to stick to it, and you have to go through the different stages that, honestly, professionals have figured out. Like, how do you conceive of the project? How do you come up with ideas? How do you go through the steps of raw creation and then make it more refined? What kinds of technical considerations do you have to have? What do you have to know in order to get it to reproduce properly? All those different things are stuff that illustrators learn. They learn them in art school and design school. They learn them through years of process. And ultimately, they all come up with their own variations on how to do it. And that's what Illustration Nation is about. It's about this virtual nation of illustrators, this huge group, 9 people with, many, many years of experience between them, all coming together and saying, like, here's how you work on a project like this. So Marluce is one of them. Marluce has self-published books. She's done magazine illustration. She's created all kinds of things. And so this book is an example where she went on a trip and she made a little book about it. She took the not just the journal that she made, but really it's more than a journal, because it's designed to be like a book. And it's here's got a map, and it's just about this trip that she took. It doesn't doesn't take an earth-shattering experience to create a beautiful, fun book, and that's what this is. So another kind of example what you can do. I self-published a couple little books. This is a book I wrote called School for Evil, a novel for uneducated children, and I think I may have talked about this book before, but I illustrated it, and ultimately, I'm not a children's book illustrator, but or author, but I like the idea of writing this kind of story. It was just fun to do. And so what was I going to do with it? I spent a little bit of time trying to get it published, I'll be honest with you, but then ultimately I thought, who cares? I'm not going to just throw it in a drawer. I want to actually make it and have it be a little book. And sure enough, I did. I went and got it published, got it printed, got a author's illustration, on the back. And there it is. It's a little book. Hey, it's my book. I wrote it. I could put it on the shelf. So, you can actually buy a copy of it if you want, or not. Here's another book I made called Me Time. Again, thin little book. And it's basically about this idea that I had that I would get up an hour early and I would spend that hour doing something interesting. So this is the description of that, what it would be like to get up an hour early and then to spend time in my garden on my terrace with my flowers and to talk about that experience. What is that like to commune with nature, or to look at old books that I haven't looked at in many years and I just never have time to make time to look at them, to look at my stamp album from when I was a kid and to remember what it meant to me. This play that I was in high school, to look at that. To take my dog for a walk and really let him lead me, and to see what exactly he was experiencing as he walks. What is it all about? What is he exploring? What is he trying to learn? To really try and put myself into his mind. We had a little turtle at the time, and I spent some time with that turtle. And here I just walked east on my street and recorded everything that I experienced as I walked. So, I published this book with blurb, and again, you could buy a copy of it. I'm not saying you should, but I wanted to make it. I wanted to make it and to make it into a project. It's really fun to take all these tools we've been accumulating through taking sketchbook school classes and working in our sketchbooks, and say, what? How about if I do something like more polished, more intense? This is the first this class that I mentioned before, Illustration Nation. It's the first time that we've taught a class where it lasts for 4 weeks, but you make one thing. And I'll be honest with you, 4 weeks is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to make a book like Stephen Reddy made, one of these kind of books, this took more than 4 weeks. Trust me. It takes a lot of work. But how do you begin? And also, how do you tackle it? I think when you come upon a big project like that, like, maybe I'll make a 300-page book, or maybe I'll write an illustrated children's story. It can be daunting, right? It's a challenge. It's a lofty aspiration. But if you learn from people who know how to do these things, if they tell you, here's how you break it down, here's what the components are that matter, here's how to have a sense of accomplishment, because that's really important too. If you're going on a marathon journey, you want to be able to know, I'm getting there. I have a long way to go still, but I'm getting there. So, ultimately, is your goal to make something professional that you could sell? I know a number of people, myself included, who have made something like this, a personal project, but then ultimately it turned into something that was actually published by a publisher. That's not necessarily the goal, but that could be a nice sort of side benefit. But your purpose might just be to share something with your family and friends. Your purpose might be just to make it for yourself, to see it through, to take what you've done and to push yourself into new territory. And you may make a series of personal projects before you make the big one, or you may never make the big one. That's not the point. But this is a new experience. And going deep with people who do it for a living is a fantastic way to learn. It was funny when we were making this class, a lot of the artists who we were interviewing, they were fascinated by this discussion. And they said, I would love to know what other illustrators do. And so we decided, yeah, that's great. In fact, all of them are going to be enrolled in the class because they're all dying to know, how do other people do thumbnail sketches? How do other people do research? Where do other people come up with ideas? How do the other people negotiate with their editors to come up with, to produce the idea that they want the way they want to do it? How do other people use computers in their process? Because ultimately everything needs to end up in a computer to be printed. But at what stage does the computer come into it? How do they use gouache and colored pencils and all the different things? So this class isn't going to tell you how to do it the way that any one of them does, but it's kind of like hanging out in like a workshop, like a literal workshop, a shop where people work, and observing them and hearing what they have to say and what their stories are. It's really interesting. So anyway, that class, we just posted it. We just put it out there. You can sign up. We start at some point in February 19th. I forget the exact date, but it'll be around forever to take. And if you have a project that you want to do, this is a great way to jump in. If you don't have a project you want to do, this is a great way to start thinking about it. And, it's just a resource to have. I think that's part of what we were thinking is let's capture this experience. And Penny and I worked on this class for a solid year. It was a year ago in December that we started thinking about this in 2016. And now here it is, January 2018. It took that long to really work it through, to get the right people, to do all the different steps of the process. And so there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff in this, a lot of information in this class, and I think that makes it really great. So anyway, maybe I'll see you there, maybe not. But if you do, one thing I would ask of you is this. If you do publish a book, if you do print a book, if you do make a book of some kind, please let me know. I'd love to buy a copy. I'd love to get a copy to add to my shelf and to see how you can add to my inspiration, because I think that's, seeing how other people make stuff is just really interesting to me. I love it, and I want to keep going with it. So anyway, let me know. Write to me, Danny at DannyGregory.com, Danny at SketchbookSchool.com, however you want to reach me, and let me know, hey, dude, I've hit the big time. Clear some room on your shelf. I've got something awesome to put there. So I'd love to see it. Thanks for hanging out with me again today. And we will, I have several new things I want to talk to you about. So stay tuned for more episodes of Sketchbook Club. Sorry if there's been a bit of a gap, but I'm ready to roll again. So I hope to see you there.